Green Party presidential candidate Cornel West made his opposition to war one of the cornerstones of his platform, speaking at an anti-war event sponsored by nonprofit organization Code Pink yesterday. Dr. West unleashed on the pro-war zealots in Washington. Let's watch.
There was a time in which the black community was the most anti-war community in the history of the American empire, but here come Barack Obama dropping 71 bombs every day, 26,117 in 1 year in 7 countries, walking around with the Nobel Peace Prize. That's a key sweat moment. Something just ain't right.
Here to break down the urgency to establish peace in Ukraine and the forces opposing it is Dr. West himself, along with Code Pink's national co-director, Danica Katovich. Guys, welcome to the show. Dr. West, I want to get your immediate reaction to a lot of the labor unrest that we're seeing across the country right now, despite the fact that Joe Biden claims to be the most pro-union president in history.
Well, I mean, part of it is just it's part of the blowback. You see, Biden has been rationalizing corporate greed for a long time. You ask anybody in Delaware about the credit card companies, ask anybody on Wall Street about how Biden is actually the recipient of millions and millions of dollars. So part of it has to do with his hypocrisy. So in that sense, it's just a matter of just telling the truth. And that's why I'm blessed to stand here with my dear sister, Danica, because Code of Pink has been 11 in a loaf. It's been one of the forces for good. And it is a calling to question, not just militarism, but American imperialism. It's a critique of the empire, a critique of those 800 military units around the world and all that money going to military-industrial complex and hardly any money left for jobs with a living wage, health care, quality education.
Dr. West, staying on this topic of war, obviously last night you were at the Code Pink event, and today you are coming to us live from a protest event that Code Pink just did in the Hart Congressional Building this morning. In Bernie Sanders' offices, as I understand it, as it was described last night. Can you talk a little bit about the choice to go and protest at progressive offices about the anti-war issue, especially as we're talking on the eve of House Leader Kevin McCarthy being ousted from the speakership position, in part because of tension between the Freedom Caucus, who wanted to put limits on funding to Ukraine, and basically the rest of the establishment on both sides of the aisle, including to the disappointment of some progressives, seemingly all of the squad members and the self-described progressives on the left.
Well, the progressives just need to be exposed. Their accommodation to militarism. Now, it was, of course, Code Pink, my dear sister Medea Benjamin, and my dear sister Danica, who made that decision. And I love Bernie Sanders. He's my dear brother. He's wrong. And I don't know, you get a chance to speak your mind on this, my dear sister.
Yeah, of course. You know, the working class in the United States can't be fooled. When we have trillions of dollars in debt and suffocating debt, student debt, medical debt, when we have over hundreds of thousands of people who are unhoused in this country, in the wealthiest country in the entire world, in the entire history of the world. The working class can't be fooled when you tell us that we don't have enough money for healthcare, we don't have enough money to fund public colleges, we don't have enough money for infrastructure or public transportation, and you can mobilize over $100 billion for Ukraine in just over a year. And when we should have progressive leaders in Congress, we should have some progressive Democrats calling for less austerity and more money for the people when they can mobilize over $100 billion for war and $800 billion, almost $900 billion for the Pentagon budget next year. And we don't have a single champion in Congress calling for this or diplomacy in Ukraine.
Dr. West, I want to stick to that point that Danica just made about the funding to Ukraine. So a CNN poll came out August 4th by SSRS that showcased 54% of Americans, Democrats, independents, and Republicans, do not want additional funding for Ukraine. You're a presidential candidate. What would your message be? And Danica, I'd love to get your thoughts on this as well. What's the message to conservative voters, Dr. West, who may not necessarily be looking at you as a candidate, but I do think you may have a compelling argument that some conservatives may be open to?
Well, first and foremost, you want to bear witness to an anti-imperialist, anti-war stance because it's right, because it's moral. If 2% of the population believe that, I'm going to say it anyway. If 98% of the population says it, I'm going to say it. Now, certainly, I want more of my fellow citizens to be persuaded, but it's first and foremost a moral and a spiritual witness against the American empire, shaping the world in its own interest, tied to corporate profits, and losing sight of the humanity of those Frantz Fanon called the wretched of the earth. This is AFRICOM in Africa. It's what happened in Haiti. It's in Latin America, and so forth. So that we shall see. I'm going to fight. I'm going to be consistent no matter what.
Yeah, I completely agree with Dr. West. And, the Republicans aren't exactly against funding for Ukraine for the same reasons Code Pink is. They don't want to funnel all of this war money, the Pentagon budget and foreign military aid into things like that matter, like healthcare, accessibility, and that sort of thing.
I think it's a really important point, Danica, and I love to mention that when we had an opportunity to interview Marjorie Taylor Greene on this show, and I asked her more broadly whether she supported cuts to the military budget, she said no, despite being opposed to the war in Ukraine. So I do think it's important to ask conservatives where they do plan to spend the money in the interim and whether or not their objection to war is as holistic as it might seem as first blush. I do want to stay on one of the points that Shermichael raised just now about the potential appeal that you have in a general election context, Dr. West. Since we last spoke, RFK Jr. has indicated that he now is likely to leave the Democratic Party. He plans to make this announcement on October 9th to run as an independent as well. He is someone who has been perceived to be an anti-war candidate as well, at least, again, when it comes to the war in Ukraine. So I wondered if I could get your reactions to that news, Dr. West, and whether you think it will have a negative, positive, neutral impact on your own campaign.
Well, it's hard to say. I salute my dear brother RFK Jr. I wish he opposed the war against Palestinians. That's one starting point right there. But I think he's got some very important things to say, and we'll see what his announcement is about this coming Monday. I've got an announcement myself coming up in the next couple of days, but I'm just going to throw that out there and see. But I want to salute both of you because we got this wonderful interplay between Harvard and Morehouse. And it's a beautiful dialectic on television. I can tell you that right now. And black folk too. Ooh, looking so good, looking so beautiful. I salute you.
Dr. West, I want to ask you this question. So about 90+% of black voters voted for Joe Biden in 2020. Joe Biden made that statement on the Breakfast Club that you ain't black if you don't vote for me. Here we are, about 4 years in. The status of many urban communities across our country haven't improved. When I go back to visit my family in New Orleans, a lot of people are still struggling, it's still worse off. What would you say to African Americans who are disgruntled, who aren't happy, and they're looking for somebody else, but Democrats will say, but Biden is the best option? What do you say to that?
Well, one, is very clear that large numbers of precious black folk who are not just rejecting Biden, but some of them are moving in a neo-fascist way, more and more supporting Trump, especially the black brothers. And I want to say to them that if they're indeed frustrated with Biden, they ought to look my way. They ought to look toward the legacy of Martin King. They ought to look toward the fight against poverty and homelessness. They ought to look toward jobs with a living wage. They ought to be in solidarity with the UAW strikers. And most importantly, they ought to respect themselves enough to think for themselves. Don't let anybody think for them. That, for me, is the most important thing. Because, see, black self-love and black self-respect, and that's true for human self-love and human self-respect, in the end, is so crucial. So you won't be seduced and bamboozled by anybody. That's why I'm a jazz man in politics. Because when you're a jazz man and a jazz woman, you're not bamboozled by anybody. You wrestling with your own voice and trying to transfigure your own wounds into a sound that touches the souls of others. That's a great tradition. That's my tradition. And I'm going to be faithful to it until death.
Danica, before we wrap, it's such a wonderful kind of scoop to get you right from the heart building after you've done this demonstration. Can you just tell us a little bit about what happened there in this confrontation? Was Senator Sanders around? What did it look like this morning?
So actually, we are reporting live. That demonstration is happening currently. We had a prayer circle in the morning in the Hart Building and sang, which is actually illegal and not allowed in the Capitol building, in the Senate Hart Building. We also had a banner drop, and right now, Code Pink activists are at Bernie Sanders' office, risking arrest. So we will find out very shortly what happened. We'll make sure to send over what went down.
Please do keep us posted, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr.
We
West.
thank both of you. Salute you. Stay strong.